Red Shellman.
I pinch.
I am so excited to be getting into this one today. For one, I'm a huge Pokemon fan. I've been playing Pokemon since I played my very first video game ever, Pokemon Yellow. And for two, everybody knows to make it on YouTube, you have to release at least one Pokemon video. But almost every subject imaginable has been covered, but I couldn't find an Iceberg based on the Colosseum games. Now, I did find one. This iceberg chart is inspired by an iceberg made by Horror Monster 26 on Reddit. Check him out. But I started to add in all my own entries and it turned into this colossal mess. So before we begin, I need to lay down some ground rules. To begin with, I'm going to come at this assuming you have some knowledge of Pokemon, meaning I don't have to explain what the Kanto region is, water beats fire, how to catch Pokemon, things such as. And for two, I'm not going to waste the first 10 entries going over the basic plot of the game. Instead, I'm going to summarize it right now. So if you want to go ahead and skip to the first layer, you can. So to summarize, Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon Colosseum XD, its sequel, were released in 2004 and 2005 respectively, and they're both GameCube RPG titles, the first of their kind. In these games, things work a little differently. You don't capture wild Pokemon, at least not at first. But your goal is to steal Pokemon, don't get too excited though, from evildoers known as Team Snag'em and Team Cypher. These Pokemon have unfortunately been captured and corrupted and turned into shadow Pokemon. It's your job as the protagonist to take these Pokemon back from these evildoers, undo the corruption that's been done to them, and then ultimately confront Team Cypher and save the region. And this takes place in both games by both protagonists. There, is that a good enough summary? Now, to get some more house cleaning out of the way, please like and subscribe if you like the video. If you don't like it, hey, unsubscribe, dislike, no problem. I have no problem with that. It just means I need to do better. I also have memberships and super thanks available. You never have to give me anything, but I'll be eternally grateful. And in the future, if I keep going, I'll be able to add some perks in the future. But anyway, I want to get into it. Let's not waste any more time. Let's begin the Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon Colosseum XD Iceberg, starting now. Layer 1. Pokemon roster. Alright, there's a reason why Pokemon doesn't tell you to catch them all anymore, because it was difficult back then, and it's over 1,000 Pokemon now, so good luck. Pokemon Colosseum takes place during the third generation of Pokemon following the Ruby and Sapphire Game Boy Advance games, and at the time there was no way to connect to your old Game Boy games, meaning that those Pokemon were simply lost. The Generation 3 decks, the Hoenn decks, had 202 Pokemon, while there was a total of 386, meaning that there was Pokemon left out. Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon Colosseum XD help fill those gaps in. In Pokemon Colosseum, there's 48 snaggable Pokemon. In Pokemon Colosseum, you start with 2 Pokemon, there's 48 additional catchable Pokemon, and 2 further gift Pokemon that you can obtain. There's also 3 other Pokemon you could obtain, but only in a Japanese version, and more on that later. In Pokemon Colosseum XD, the roster is widened to 83 snaggable Pokemon, and of course all their potential evolutions. Your starter, Eevee, its 5 evolutions. You can then get a total of 8 gift Pokemon, theoretically, and there's 9 wild Pokemon you could catch. So, to summarize, by the time Pokemon Colosseum XD came out, Fire Red and Leaf Green were coming out too, which were remakes of the Kanto region, meaning that by the time Pokemon XD was out, you could theoretically catch all 386 Pokemon. Although you'd probably still have to connect to a Japanese version, but you see how it gets complicated? Let's move on. Groudon and Kyogre not available in Pokemon Colosseum. So, Groudon and Kyogre are the two legendary Pokemon of Ruby and Sapphire. They're on the boxes of the games, and they play a very important role. If you look at the box of Pokemon Colosseum, you have the three legendary dogs there, and you have Groudon and Kyogre. But you know what's not in Pokemon Colosseum? Groudon and Kyogre. You actually have to import them in from your Ruby Sapphire game using a Game Boy Advance link cable to your Nintendo GameCube if you want to actually use them in game. So man, talk about false advertisement. In Pokemon XD, Groudon and Kyogre do appear as robots, but that's just sort of goofy. Anyway, we'll move on. No Generation 1 Pokemon obtainable in Colosseum. So yeah, you may not have noticed, but when you play Pokemon Colosseum, the vast majority of Pokemon you can collect come from the Johto region. In fact, there's only 8 you can even get from the Hoenn region if you include the Gift Plusle. So I guess they really wanted you to make sure that you could get Johto Pokemon in your game if you wanted them. Of course, this could also imply they were already planning on Fire Red and Leaf Green being out, so they needed you to have a way to get the Johto Pokemon. Interesting. Now, XD corrects this problem. There are Pokemon from all the games, but anyway, yeah, just thought it was interesting. Sorry, Gen 1ers. Let's move on. Espeon and Umbreon. So in Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon Colosseum XD, you fight in double battles. In the first game, you start with 2 starter Pokemon, Espeon and Umbreon. Espeon and Umbreon are Johto Pokemon released in Generation 2, and they both evolved from Eevee after having high friendship. The fact that our protagonist in the first game has both of these Pokemon would imply that he is pretty friendly with them and they've been around with them for a long time, given that they evolved. Or, you know, he stole them, I guess, which is a possibility. But that's not really my headcanon, and if you look at their summary, it does say they're Wes's old friends. More on that later. So, this implies that Wes is a good dude. But we'll talk more about him in a minute. Let's move on. Shadow Lugia. So Lugia is a legendary Pokemon introduced in Generation 2 in the Johto games. It's on the box art of the second game, XD Gale of Darkness. Now, Shadow Lugia in the game is never even referred to as Lugia by anybody except for the protagonist. It's referred to as XD001. Supposedly, it has a heart that is unpurifiable. Of course, you can purify it. It's a process, and I'll let you figure that out. But to summarize, Shadow Lugia is the draw of the game. It's on the box art. It doesn't even really play a big role in the story, which is kind of weird. But it's also the only Shadow Pokemon that I know of to actually have a different form. It looks like a totally different Pokemon. But you can play the game for yourself, purify it for yourself. I just threw a Master Ball at it and was done with it. But yeah, Shadow Lugia. Let's move on. Okay, Spot Encounters. Alright, so I mentioned earlier that in this game to obtain Pokemon, you take them back from evildoers. However, in XD Gale of Darkness, there are some wild Pokemon to catch. You see, for whatever reason, which we may get into later, in this region, the Ore region, wild Pokemon have either been all captured or they've been driven out of the area. But 5 years later from the first game, Pokemon XD has some Pokemon available in the wild to catch. There's 9 of them, like they're starting to return to the area for whatever reason. And of course, they do have their evolutions. And furthermore, you can also trade some of these Pokemon to a character named Duke King, and he'll give you some of his Pokemon in exchange, such as a Larvitar. So yeah, check it out. Let's move on. Protagonist canon names. So in the Pokemon games, you're typically allowed to name your own character. It could be Juan or Susan or Robert or whatever else, but they usually have names that are official. Everybody knows that the player in the very first game is named Red canonically, right? In Pokemon Colosseum, your character's canon name is Wes and your companion character's name is Rui. In Japanese, they're Reo and Mide. In the second game, the protagonist's canon name is Michael. In Japanese, it's Ryuto. I'm going to be referring to them as Wes, Rui, and Michael, just so you don't get confused. I just wanted to point that out. Let's move on. Johto Starter Pokemon Selection. Alright, so this refers to 2 events. In Pokemon Colosseum, in the first city, the protagonist is blocked from leaving the city by one of 3 characters. Rosso, Bluno, or Verde blocking one of the 3 exits. Whichever one you talk to will challenge you to a battle, and they'll have one of the 3 starter Pokemon from Johto, their evolved form, Quilava, Bayleaf, or Croconaw, and you're able to catch them. The other 2 will disappear. This is the game's clever way of giving you a starter Pokemon without telling you it's giving you a starter Pokemon. You can, of course, obtain the other 2 later on in the post-game. In Pokemon XD, Gale of Darkness, if you complete Mount Battle, you'll be gifted one of 3 starter Pokemon from Johto, the beginning forms, either Chikorita, Totodile, or Cyndaquil, and you can repeat this process to get all 3. So yeah, it's a bit complicated, it's a bit much to do, but you can select your Johto starter Pokemon in either game. Anyway, let's move on. Shadow Pokemon. Alright, so Pokemon Colosseum introduces Shadow Pokemon. They're regular Pokemon, but they've had their hearts artificially closed off. Oh, what that means essentially is they're fighting machines, they're a bit more ruthless. In the first game, they're more of a burden and a handicapped, but in the second game, oh yeah, they're incredible. They can do some seriously powerful moves. Now, in the game, your goal is to purify them, and by that, you make friends with them, and then you take them to see either Celebi in Agate Village, or you put them in the new and improved purification machine in Pokemon XD. By doing this, they're able to grow, gain experience, evolve, learn new moves, and things such as. Using them in battle is a way to get them to be more friendly to you, but in battle they can go into what's called reverse mode, hyper mode in the first game, and the protagonist has to call them out in-game to get them to, chill the hell out, I guess, and that's how you make them friendlier. Just so you know, when I talk about Shadow Pokemon, this is basically what I'm getting at. Anyway, let's move on. Call a sleeping Pokemon to awaken them. Alright, so this is a game mechanic the game doesn't tell you about, but I just mentioned calling on a Pokemon when it goes into hyper mode to get it to calm down and not hurt itself. But if you have a regular Pokemon or a Shadow Pokemon and it happens to fall asleep due to the events of a battle, you can call them to wake them up. Now, I just think this is neat and the game doesn't tell you about it, so check it out for yourself. Let's move on. Tier 2. Michael's father. Alright, so in the Pokemon games, a common trope or motif is the lack of a father figure. You almost always have a mother figure in the game, but you're never mentioned to have a father, he's not around, and there's rarely ever even a mention of him, with 3 exceptions. The first exception will be in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. If your character goes to the Celadon department store and examines the television, they will say that there's a sports game on TV and that Dad will love this. Notice he says will and not would have, implying that he is still around, just not in the game. And in the third series of games, Generation 3, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, your father is present in the game. He's a gym leader that you have to battle about halfway through the game. And the third exception is Pokemon XD, Colosseum, Gale of Darkness, where Michael's father is mentioned, but unfortunately, he has passed away. Now, we don't exactly know why, how, or when necessarily. Other characters seem to avoid the topic, and they seem to be more respectful to Michael. Now, what does all this mean? Well, give me 30 seconds. Let me explain something real quick. A missing father figure is a common motif in a lot of media, not just Pokemon, of course. Basically, what it means is like finishing your father's work, following in his footsteps, finding your father. It's a common trope, and it's a common motivation for characters to have, right? I believe this is why in the Pokemon games, which are about adventures, coming of age, things such as, this is why there's not a father figure in the game, even if it's not directly spelled out. But in Pokemon Colosseum XD Gale of Darkness, Michael's father, again, is no longer around. But here's what we do know about Michael's father. For one, he loved Pokemon. He gave Michael his first Pokemon, an Eevee. For 2, he was a good Pokemon battler. And for 3, he was actively leading the efforts to purify Shadow Pokemon that appeared in the Ore region thanks to the events of the first game. And 5 years later, him, along with Professor Crane and the rest of the laboratory, were working to find a way to purify these Pokemon. But unfortunately, Michael's father passed away. Again, we don't know how or why. There is a theory we'll get into way at the end of this iceberg. But this is very important for understanding Michael's motivations. Granted, these are supposed to be blank slate characters. We're not really supposed to see their inner dialogue, right? But if you understand Michael's father to be deceased, but to be working on purifying shadow Pokemon, to having a clear and set goal or motivator, you can understand Michael's kind of motivation. In the first game, Wes, you could almost say he's just sort of dragged along by the plot, meaning that the plot kind of interrupts his own story and he just jumps into it to fix it up. But in the second game, Michael actively leads the charge against the villainous team. So to summarize, in the first game, Wes and Rui react to Team Cypher's actions. In the second game, Team Cypher reacts to Michael's actions, actively antagonizing, challenging, and trying to get in his and the laboratory's way. So this is just really cool motivation, in case you missed it. Now, granted, a lot of people just say, shut the hell up, I just want to catch a bunch of Pokemon, whatever, blah, 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 who cares? But to me, this is fascinating. Thank you for listening. Let's move on. Pikachu's not in either game. Yeah, so if you look at the roster of both of these games, you'll notice that Pikachu is absent. Pikachu is the Pokemon, okay? Your grandmother knows what Pikachu is. Your boomer neighbor knows what Pikachu is. Everyone knows who Pikachu is. It sticks out. It's that cute little adorable creature. It's bright yellow. I mean, you kind of can't miss it, right? However, despite the fact that Pikachu is the mascot of Pokemon, which, fun fact, originally it was going to be Clefairy, but Pikachu won out. Anyway, despite the fact that it's the mascot Pokemon, you can't catch Pikachu in either game. The only way to have it is to import it from Ruby and Sapphire, which you can catch in the Safari Zone, I believe. Anyway, I just found this to be an interesting factoid, like, why not, you know? But then again, later on in Generation 5, Black and White, Pikachu wasn't catchable either. At least until Black and White 2. Interesting. Let's move on. The Ore region. So both of these games take place in what's known as the Ore region. The region that a Pokemon game takes place in is usually pretty important. The first 3 games, that's the first 3 generations, all take place in Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn, and they're all based on an area of Japan. The 4th game takes place in a region known as Sinnoh, which is also Japan, and it wasn't until the 5th generation when we went to Unova, which is supposed to be based off of a city in the US. However, before the 4th generation, Ore came out, and Ore is based off a region in the US once again, Arizona. Now, I've never been to Arizona. I can't imagine it looks this desolate, but anyway, Ore is a desert region, and many fans like to speculate that this is somehow involving the Great Pokemon War, which is just kind of silly. You can look into it if you want. But for whatever reason, also from the beginning of the first game, there's no wild Pokemon in the area, which is unusual considering there are Pokemon that thrive in the desert, but they don't start to come back until the events of the second game. Along with that, there's a lot of crime that's taken place. It's a bit more run down. I believe the artists themselves said that they wanted to juxtapose cute characters with kind of a pretty beat up background. But anyway, the fact is the Ore region has unfortunately never been used since the second game, but it's a neat little area and it is based on Arizona, like I said. Let's move on. Phoenix City, based on Phoenix, Arizona. Yeah, I mean, you can just look at the name, right? Now, Phoenix City is basically the capital city of the Ore region. It's full of water. It's a lot different looking. It's cleaner. And according to the game developers themselves, it's based off Phoenix, Arizona, being that Phoenix was once a desolate wasteland, but had canals of water driven to it, and now it's a capital city of the state. And Phoenix City being the oasis in the desert. No offense if you're from Phoenix, by the way. I'm not saying your favorite city is a desolate wasteland, but what I am saying is that it's a desert city, and at one point there was nothing there, and then water. You know, you get it. You understand that. Please don't hate me. Let's move on. XD meaning. Alright, so you may have seen XD in the title of the second game and just thought nothing of it, but XD does have a definition. In fact, it stands for extra dimension, right? Which I really don't know what that's supposed to mean. But also, Shadow Lugia, like I mentioned earlier, is referred to by the villains in the game as XD001. XD, Pokemon XD, get it? That's why it's so confusing that it really doesn't play that big a role in the story. It just shows up in the beginning and then leaves and then gets talked about, and then you see it at the end of the game, you throw a Master Ball at it, and then you're done. So anyway, Pokemon XD, extra dimension. Let's move on. Genius Sonority. Genius Sonority is the game developers behind these two games. Most Pokemon games are made by Game Freak, which has been making Pokemon since Pokemon Red and Blue, and are still working on them to this day. Genius Sonority, however, is a game studio made by Nintendo and comprised of mostly poached Sony developers that were working on Dragon Quest games. They came into Nintendo and were told to create the first GameCube Pokemon RPG, and none of them really knew much about Pokemon or cared much about Pokemon, but they got to work and made these two really good games. As far as I know, they're still around. Their last project was in 2020 when they created Pokemon Cafe Remix, which is a mobile game that I didn't even know about. But yeah, in case you wondered why the Ore region, Wes and Michael, Shadow Pokemon, all that feels so much different from the rest of the Pokemon franchise, it's because they weren't made by Game Freak, but they were made by Genius Sonority, obviously. Let's move on. Games aren't canon. Yeah, unfortunately, it seems like these two games aren't canon to the Pokemon series. Now, to say there's any canonicity in any of these games, honestly, is kind of silly, because they really don't have much to do with each other, but there will be callbacks to previous games. For example, I already shown you a screenshot where you can meet Red from the first game in the second game. In Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, you can meet Jasmine, a character from the second game. And in Pokemon Sun and Moon, you can see Grimsley from the Generation 5 games, Black and White. But to this day, you've never seen a Wes, Michael, or a Rui make an appearance in any other game, or any other character from Ore. If I'm mistaken, let me know, but it seems like Game Freak, Nintendo has no interest in recycling these characters, and their stories are ultimately done, and the region just doesn't exist, unfortunately. But then again, who knows what might happen? Genius Sonority is still around. We never know. Anyway, with that, let's move on. Layer 3. Bonsly and Munchlax. Alright, so Bonsly and Munchlax were two Pokemon introduced in Generation 4, the Generation 4 games Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. They are the pre-evolved forms of Sudowoodo and Snorlax, respectively. Now, why is that important? Why am I telling you all this? Because for whatever reason in Pokemon XD, before the 4th generation of games, Bonsly and Munchlax are in the game. They make a cameo. You can't catch them, you can't obtain them, but they are there as sort of a stealth drop to kind of advertise next generation, which is pretty neat. Kind of like how in the first episode of the Pokemon anime you see Ho-Oh, a Pokemon that we had no idea what the hell it was until we got the Johto game, so it's pretty cool. But not much more to say. Let's move on. Sun Shard and Moon Shard. So I've already mentioned earlier, but Michael is given an Eevee by his father before the events of the game. Eevee is a unique Pokemon in that it can evolve one of 5 ways, at least at this point in the timeline. There's now 8, but anyway, at the time it could evolve into either Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon, Espeon, or Umbreon. Now, it's really cool in this game, you're given a choice of how you want to evolve it. An NPC early on in the game will give you an item of your choice to evolve it in whichever way you want to evolve it into. However, you may have already realized there's a problem here. Espeon and Umbreon don't evolve that way, while Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon evolve when given a elemental stone. Espeon and Umbreon only evolve when the protagonist has a high enough friendship with Eevee at a certain time of the day. For Espeon, it's during the day, and for Umbreon, it's at night. However, in Pokemon XD, there is no day or night cycle. So to get around this, you're gifted an item of your choice, either the Sun Shard or the Moon Shard, which when you give it to Eevee, it will evolve into the Pokemon that you chose to evolve it into. As far as I know, these items have never been used again in any other Pokemon game, and I can't even find a picture of what they look like. You're just given it. But anyway, I just found this to be unique. Not much more to say here. Let's move on. Pokemon Colosseum bonus disc. Alright, so back before Pokemon Colosseum was released in 2004, if you pre-ordered the game, yeah, remember pre-ordering games? Anyway, if you pre-ordered the game, you could get this bonus disc as a reward. It had a preview of the game, it had some little cartoons featuring the Pokemon Jirachi, but none of that matters, because on top of that, it came with the Pokemon Jirachi that you could download into one of your games via the GameCube Game Boy Advance Connect cable. This is really cool, as Jirachi was pretty darn hard to find before Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl that released a few years ago. So yeah, if you had a Jirachi, you had bragging rights. You could tell everybody, hey, I committed to buying something that wasn't finished yet. I'm just kidding, y'all. But yeah, the bonus disc, it's actually pretty damn hard to find even now, so maybe don't check it out, but pretty cool. Let's move on. Shadow attacks, first time physical special difference. Alright, so this one's going to get a bit nerdy, so if you want to tap on your screen maybe 6 times, it should be to the next entry. But if you're still here, Pokemon moves or Pokemon attacks are differentiated into one of 2 categories, either physical attack or special attack. To oversimplify it as much as I can, a body slam would be considered a physical attack, and a flamethrower would be considered a special attack. You can kind of visualize it in your head when you hear a move as to what stat it's going to use, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Well, you'd be surprised because this is only as of Generation 4 and beyond, the Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum games. Before this, all moves of a certain type were either going to be physical or special. So all fighting moves were physical, and all fire moves were special. So if you had a Pokemon, let's say Hitmonchan, that uses Fire Punch, makes sense, right? It's a punching Pokemon. But if it uses Fire Punch, it's not going to do a lot of damage because Hitmonchan has a really low special attack, so it made it effectively useless. However, in Pokemon Colosseum XD specifically, Shadow Pokemon were introduced and they had their own pool of moves. In the first game, they only had one move, which is kind of dumb, but in the second game, they could have a variety of moves, such as Shadow Blitz and Shadow Wave. And wouldn't you know it, Shadow Blitz goes off the Pokemon's physical attack, and Shadow Wave goes off of Pokemon's special attack. Makes sense, right? So it's kind of my headcanon that Genius Sonority was the first ones to come up with this idea and told Game Freak, hey, you should do it this way, but who knows. I just think that's pretty neat. Anyway, let's move on. Rosso, Bluno, or Verde rematch. Okay, so not much to say here. I've already mentioned earlier that these 3 goofy looking characters are basically holding the Johto starters, and whichever one you battle is the one you can snag for yourself in the first game. You get all that. The thing is, when you get to the final area of the game, the Rio Gam Tower, one of the NPCs is actually disguised as one of these characters, the character that you took their Pokemon. They'll remember you, remember if you caught their Pokemon or not, and be angry and challenge you to a rematch. I just thought this was pretty cool. It's a missable battle. Let's move on. Stealing Pokemon is not a crime in Ore. Alright, so I've already mentioned earlier that with the exception of the 9 wild Pokemon you can get in XD, in these games you catch Pokemon by taking them from other trainers, but only Shadow Pokemon. Now, the thing is, unless you already know a Pokemon's a Shadow Pokemon, there's no way of knowing by looking at them. There's only 2 characters canonically that can tell the difference, Rui and Michael. And Michael only because he uses technology specifically designed to see them. Rui can just see them naturally, but more on that later. So What's going on here is that you have Wes or Michael just straight up stealing a Pokemon from another trainer in broad daylight, and no one really knows why. After the battle, the other trainer doesn't even really respond. They're just like, dang, you beat me. But they don't really know that it's a shadow Pokemon unless they were already told it was one. So I just think this is pretty interesting, especially when you have Colosseum battles against Meyer B, for example, Best Boy, and he throws out a shadow Pokemon in the middle of a Colosseum with everybody watching. You can just straight up steal his Pokemon, and that's considered a victory. So what's stopping anybody else from stealing your Pokemon, other than they don't have a snag machine like Michael and Wes do? I don't know. I just think that's pretty interesting that no one seems to care. Let's move on. Legendary Pokemon aren't legendary in Ore. Alright, stay with me here. Legendary Pokemon are one of a kind, super strong, typically mythical, whatever else, right? The Colosseum and XD games have a number of legendary Pokemon you can encounter and collect, such as the 3 legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, the 3 legendary dogs, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, Ho-Oh and Lugia, and Celebi, right? The thing is, besides Ho-Oh and Celebi, all of the rest of the legendary Pokemon are treated like normal Pokemon. Let me explain. So in the first game, Pokemon Colosseum, 3 of the 4 Cypher admins, which are basically the generals of the Cypher army, have the 3 legendary dogs, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. But they aren't treated like legendaries. They're just thrown out and they surprise you. They surprise the player and you catch them and that's it. No one remarks, oh wow, the legendary dogs, or oh wow, you got my legendary Pokemon. It's just like, okay, you got it. Big deal. Now, why is this important? Well, because throughout the game, the Cypher admins and the Cypher peons tell you that they're working on the ultimate shadow Pokemon. They foreshadow this quite a bit in the first game. They call it ultimate shadow Pokemon. So if you've caught Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, or at least battled them, you'll be like, oh man, what could be more ultimate than them? Maybe Ho-Oh, maybe Mewtwo, maybe Mew. But then you get to the final boss and he throws out his ultimate shadow Pokemon, and it's a Tyranitar. Now don't get me wrong, Tyranitar is good. Damn good. It's super strong. But is it really stronger than the 3 legendary dogs? Is it really more mythical than them? I mean, I'm pretty sure I have 2 of them in my Pokemon home right now. One of them's shiny. So, what's the big deal? Then you can kind of get into a headcanon theory, like, why were the 3 legendary dogs even in Ore if they're from Johto, which is basically Japan, and Ore is basically the US? But I'm really getting into the weeds here. Let me know what you think. Anyway, let's move on. Be a man, stomp her down. Alright, so this one just refers to some funny dialogue. It made me laugh my ass off when I saw it again as an adult. But in the first game, your protagonist Wes is kind of a ladies killer, right? A lot of female NPCs will comment on how attractive you are, and other NPCs will comment that you and Rui make a cute couple, right? So one of the first NPCs that you meet in Pyrite Town actually tells Wes, hey, you should ditch Rui and get with me. Then Rui and her get into an argument when Rui tells Wes, be a man, stomp her down. I just thought that was funny. Like, oh yeah, Wes, be a man, assault that woman. Oh, I mean that's ridiculous. I'm sorry, don't unsubscribe. Let's move on. Layer 4, Johto starter in XD. Alright, maybe I'm repeating myself a bit here, but at the end of Pokemon XD, if you complete the Mount Battle Challenge, which is 100 battles that you have to complete, you're able to get one of the 3 Johto starters, either Chikorita, Cyndaquil, or Totodile. These Pokemon are unique, however, in that they all come with their ultimate move, Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, and Hydro Cannon. And this is repeatable. You just have to complete the Mount Battle Challenge over again to get the second one, and then a third time to get the third one. If you have 40 hours or 50 hours to do all this, then go right ahead. Or you could just transfer Pokemon from Pokemon Colosseum into a game and then breed them with the Ditto and get an egg and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Let's move on. Oh, Alright, so I've already mentioned Ho-Oh. It's a legendary Pokemon, one of the box legendaries that came on Pokemon Gold. Anyway, you can obtain Ho-Oh in Pokemon Colosseum. It does play a minor role in the story, but not really much. In order to get Ho-Oh, you'll have to complete the Mount Battle, there you go again, 100 Battle Challenge, and purify all 48 purifiable Shadow Pokemon. So if you have 100 hours to do all that, then there you go, you can get Ho-Oh. Or again, you could just wait until it's available, but, you know, whatever. Anyway, Ho-Oh, let's move on. Rui's outfit localized. Oh boy, time for my least favorite subject, localization. So in the Japanese version, the character Rui was supposed to have a shorter skirt and show a midriff. This was changed in the international version. Now the skirt I can get, I mean I don't agree with, but I get it. But the midriff, there's other characters, female NPCs that show midriff in the game, so I mean this just seems kind of pointless. But you know, we gotta censor outfits for the international audience, they might get offended. Anyway, let's move on. Celebi and Jirachi. Alright, so let me correct something I said earlier. I said earlier that Celebi was a legendary Pokemon, and technically that's not true. It's a mythical Pokemon, which is another set of Pokemon that are even harder to obtain. Celebi makes an appearance in this game and plays a role in the story, but not much. And Jirachi, I've already mentioned, you could get via the bonus disc for pre-ordering Pokemon Colosseum. Well, in the Japanese version of the bonus disc, you could obtain Celebi instead. Not much more to it than that, just these are really unusual and hard to obtain Pokemon, and this is how you obtain them. Moving on. Tsukasa Tawada. Alright, so one of the best things about any Pokemon game is the soundtrack. Even if you don't like the games, you'll love the soundtrack, typically. The composer of these two games, the head composer I should say, Tsukasa Tawada, created all of these amazing music tracks that you're hearing in this video, as well as all of the tracks in the game. He also worked on quite a few other games for Genius Sonority, and even a Harvest Moon game at one point. You can even check him out right now on his YouTube channel that I'm going to link below if you'll remind me. That's really awesome. That's really cool. I love his work. Please keep going, sir. Let's move on. Wild Skarmory. Alright, so I've already mentioned in the events of the first game, there's no wild Pokemon to be found in the Ore region. However, right at the beginning of the game, in the opening cutscene, you see a Skarmory fly by. Now, you might say, well, this is Gonzap's Skarmory, because Gonzap, that you fight later on in the game, has a Skarmory. But that's a Shadow Skarmory, so is this the same one? I mean, it makes sense, it's in the same area, but keep in mind that Wes has no knowledge of Shadow Pokemon, so this should have been given to Gonzap after Wes does his whole escape. So is this just another random Skarmory? Probably not, but I thought it was interesting enough to bring up. Is it? What do you think? Let's move on. Krabby not available. Alright, so this one hits me right in the heart specifically. So in Pokemon XD, you go to a place called Gation Port. And at Gation Port, there's a sort of a bar and restaurant known as the Krabby Club. But get this, Krabby isn't available in either game to catch, to purify, or whatever. You have to import it from another game. So I mean, that's ridiculous, right? You have the Krabby Club, but no Krabby in the game? That's crab-phobic. Anyway, let's move on. Layer 5, Pokemon Colosseum manga. So you may or may not know this, but a lot of the Pokemon games have an official manga tied to them, and they're usually pretty dark and pretty graphic, right? Which is surprising. Like, for example, did you know in the Pokemon Emerald manga, there's actually a couple of pages where Archie and Maxie fight to the death? No, seriously, they have a fist fight to the death. It's pretty wild. You can look into a lot more of these for yourself, but Pokemon Colosseum itself has a manga. While it's never been serialized, put into a book, or officially translated, there was a Pokemon Colosseum manga known as Pokemon Snatcher's Rail that came out in a magazine in Japan called Koro Koro to promote the game. It's hard to find scans of these pages and even harder to find translations of them. You can look it up for yourself. From what I can see, there's nothing really too wild going on here, but yeah, interesting. Let's move on. Shinichi Hiromoto. Alright, Shinichi Hiromoto was the lead character designer in both of these games. What's so interesting about that? Well, it's the only Pokemon projects he's ever worked on, and his other work includes Star Wars Return of the Jedi, the manga, which I didn't even know had a manga, and let me open up WordPad, and I'm going to look into that later. Some of his other works include Sex Machine. Just going to write that down for research later, and let's move on. Wes's True Motives. Alright, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but in the second game, Michael's motives, we could argue at least, that he's following in his father's footsteps. But what are Wes's motives? We see in the beginning of the game, Wes is escaping Team Snag'em after blowing up their headquarters and stealing their Snag'em device. We find out later on that he used to be a member of Team Snag'em who betrayed them. In the beginning of the game, he drives to Outskirts Stand where you finally take control of him, and you could assume maybe he's there to get a meal or to potentially fuel up before he skips the region altogether. But then he spots Rui being kidnapped and intervenes, and then sort of falls into the story. But if he hadn't have spotted Rui being kidnapped, what would Wes have done? Just kept going? We have no idea. I love this kind of vagueness about his personality because essentially, however good or neutral or even chaotic he may be is really up to you. What exactly were Wes's plans, and what is Wes doing after the events of Pokemon Colosseum? Yeah, we'll probably never know, but it's interesting. Let's move on. Shadow Lugia promo card. Alright, so there's a Pokemon trading card game, you may know this. I'm not too well versed in the game other than to know that people are currently kicking each other's asses to get cards to scalp them, which is pretty messed up. But anyway, Shadow Lugia appeared on a Pokemon card, but it's a rare promo card that was only distributed a handful of times in the US. You could first obtain it in New York at the Nintendo World Store after playing the demo. It was then distributed as part of Pokemon 10th Anniversary Celebration at the Houston Space Center, which is kind of random, in 2006. Then there was another release to the attendance of Nintendo's E3 press conference in 2006, and later was awarded as a prize to 5 finalists of the Pikachu Freeze Dance Contest at Nintendo World Store Pokemon Platinum launch event in 2009. Which is again kind of random. And in Japan, it was available with copies of Pokemon Scoop, which I guess is a Pokemon magazine or something. I can't really tell what it is. Anyway, Pokemon Shadow Lugia promo card. Interesting. Let's move on. Lavrena's title. So Lavrena is a Cypher admin in Pokemon XD. She's also like their head researcher and responsible for creating XD001, or at least corrupting Lugia. She's also the first mini-boss you fight in the game. As Michael is infiltrating the Cypher lab, he can overhear Lavrena and another Cypher grunt, I guess, talking, and the grunt calls Lavrena Sister Lavrena. This is interesting and is never brought up again. It could just be an affectionate nickname, or maybe it's Team Cypher seeing themselves as a family, or maybe they're actually siblings, but again, it's never brought up again, so it's a little unusual. Later on in the game, after you beat the game, you can go to Ore Colosseum, where you'll actually rematch the Cypher admins after a Colosseum bout. Now, I would think a better place for them would be Gale, but what do I know? Your first opponent at the end of your first bout in the Colosseum is Lavrena, and after you beat her, she tells Eagun, another character in the game with a goofy-ass name, that she wants to give you the title of her #1 fan. And that's about it. I know it's kind of weird, but I don't know, I ship these two. I think they'd be a cute couple. And I really like Lavrena. She's cute. And funny. Moving on. Team Snag'em Biden. Alright, so most of these characters in these games have goofy-ass names. Eagun, Lavrena, Rosso, Bluno, Gonzap. But there's one character in particular, one NPC that I found to be particularly interesting, Team Snag'em Biden. Now, this game was released in 2004 and 2005 respectively, and at that point, President or former President Joe Biden was still a senator. This is probably just a coincidence, but anyway, let's move on. Layer 6, Berry Glitch Fix. Alright, so introduced in Generation 2 were berries, held items that Pokemon could use, and they could eat these berries mid-battle to cure themselves of status ailments or restore health. In Generation 3, these berries were farmable in that you could plant them, water them, grow them, and then when you could harvest them and give them to your Pokemon, right? Now, the problem is, in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, there was a glitch. After the game had been played for 366 days, berries would simply stop growing. There was some other problems that occurred because of this, but this is the main one. So how do you fix this? Well, these days there would just be a 30 gigabyte patch that you would download a day or two after the game was released, but back then they had no such way unless you actually sent your game in to Nintendo for them to fix it, which would be kind of a pain in the ass for you and them. However, hidden in the bonus disc of Pokemon Colosseum, of all things, was a fix to this berry glitch. If you downloaded Jirachi, you could also get a fix to this glitch in your game. And other games that you could connect to later on down the road with fixes as well. I just think this is pretty cool, pretty neat how they used to do things back then. It's kind of a stealth fix, although in my opinion, most people would probably not play one save file for that long to actually incur this being a problem, but still, pretty neat. Let's move on. Unused trainers. So, in the files of Pokemon Colosseum lies some unused content, which we'll briefly go over at this part of the iceberg. One of them is unused trainers, and they are Hunter Rattay, which would have probably just been another Hunter class character. The Shadow Grass Pokemon King, okay. Maple's the Riddle Lover, alright. And 6 Apom siblings. I mean, I can only imagine what those last couple would be doing in the game. Interesting. Let's move on. Unused Shadow Pokemon. Alright, so I already mentioned in Pokemon Colosseum there really isn't that many Shadow Pokemon to collect. There are some that have been cut from the game, even some that were from Generation 1. And they are Spoink, Psyduck, Baltoy, Mightyena, Castform, Porygon 2, Breloom, Lunatone, Solrock, Roselia, Chimeco, Minun, which is kind of weird because Plus was in the game, but whatever, Electrode, Snorunt, Teddiursa, Corphish, man, crabphobic, Spheal, Sandslash, Magcargo, Kecleon, Wishcash, Xatu, Wobbuffet, and Wailmer. So yeah, there's a lot more Pokemon that were planned to be in the game, but just aren't in the game, sadly. You can catch a lot of these in Pokemon XD, so at least you got that. But anyway, let's move on. Berry Juice. Alright, so Berry Juice is one of the most strangest and bizarrest mechanics in all of Pokemon history. In Generation 2 onward, if you give a berry to the Pokemon Shuckle and leave it with them for a while, eventually the berry will become berry juice and will actually heal the Pokemon more than a regular berry would. Okay, I don't know if this is still a thing, but it was a thing in early generations of Pokemon. The reason it's on this list is because it's a cut item. Even though Shuckle appears in Pokemon XD as a trade Pokemon, when you trade Dew King a Surskit, he gives you the Shuckle, but even if you give it a berry, it won't turn into berry juice. Interesting. Let's move on. E-reader content removed. Alright, so this might be outside of the scope of this video. There's way better YouTubers that can tell you all about this. To summarize, the e-reader was a peripheral to be used on Nintendo devices that you could scan cards with that you also purchased, would let you play mini games, unlock more content in games, and whatever else, and Pokemon was no exception. By combining the e-reader with the Nintendo GameCube and Pokemon Colosseum, you can unlock additional content. This content is cut, however, and you can't even glitch it into the game or hack it into the English version of the game. But in the Japanese version, I believe it's still functional. You can unlock different battle modes, and after you complete some of these battle modes, you can unlock unique Pokemon that can all be shiny, which is another rabbit hole I don't feel like going into right now. And they are Togepi, Mareep, and Scizor. So Togepi and Mareep aren't that big a deal, but Scizor, being able to just obtain it without having to trade, would have been pretty cool. But it's cut content and only available in the Japanese version of the game. Sad. Luckily, with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you can now just straight up find a wild Scizor, so that's pretty cool. I have a shiny one. Let's move on. Michael was supposed to start with Jolteon and Vaporeon. Alright, so according to the game's files of Pokemon XD, originally Michael was going to use Vaporeon and Jolteon as his starter Pokemon. Now, let's think about this. All of the battles in Pokemon XD and Colosseum are double battles. That's why Wes, in the beginning of the first game, starts with Espeon and Umbreon. But Michael only starts with an Eevee. Well, until the first battle when you're forced to catch a Shadow Teddiursa, effectively making Teddiursa your starter along with Eevee. However, according to the game, you're supposed to start with Jolteon and Vaporeon, which would have been pretty cool, but I can see why they cut it. Because for one, players might have wanted the choice, which was a great decision, of what Pokemon they wanted Eevee to be, and for two, it leaves out poor Flareon. I have a thing for Flareon, man. It's kind of the underdog. I root for it. I hope it does well, even though it kind of sucks in battling. And with that, let's move on to the final layer. Layer 7. Alright, before I go any further, let me warn you officially that this layer is nothing but spoilers, essentially. So, if you want to play the game for yourself, you still can, and they're re-releasing it here pretty soon on the Switch too. So if you were waiting on that to play it again, or you don't remember the story, you don't want to know the story, you can go ahead, skip to the end. Thank you so much for being here. I love y'all. Like, comment, subscribe, dislike if you disliked it. We're going to go into some more fan theories here, as well as my own personal headcanon theories. So yeah, feel free. Anyway, thanks for being here. I love y'all. Let's get into layer 7. Ardos was the true villain. Alright, so to get into this one, I have to give you a plot summary of the ending of the game, so last chance, spoilers. Anyway, towards the end of the game, Michael is challenged directly by the head of Cypher, which is revealed to be Mr. Varric, a character that he met way at the beginning of the game, but his real name is Greevil. Greevil tells you that if you want to stop him, you'll have to come to a secret headquarters that's on an island with an active volcano, and it's surrounded by artificial whirlpools. But this is nothing to a badass like Michael. He rides on a mechanical Kyogre, gets to the island, and proceeds to tear through just an army of shadow Pokemon, Cypher adults that attack him, and one by one he defeats them. Now, I'm not kidding. This area of the game is probably a quarter of the entire game. It is nuts. It's a gauntlet. Your Pokemon will raise by over 10 levels just trying to get through this. You even rematch all of the Cypher admins like Lavrina. Once you get towards the end of this final level, you'll be challenged by Greevil's personal bodyguards, Ardos and Eldez. Two brothers, which are revealed later, blue-haired and red-haired respectively. Ardos challenges you first, and it is probably the toughest battle in the game so far. It is the toughest battle in the game so far. But once you beat him, he gets angry and tells you that even though you beat him, he's not going to give up on his goals, whatever that is. Anyway, you then go to confront Greevil and Eldez, but you have to do some running around real quick. But then you confront the both of them again, whereas Greevil sends Eldez after you to battle him. And he's even more difficult. Yeah, he throws out Shadow Salamence, so that's fun. Anyway, Eldez is a bit different. He's a bit more honorable. He says that he doesn't really want to battle you, but orders are orders. So once you beat him, he says, okay, well, good luck stopping us, I guess. Take care. Which you then have to go and confront Greevil, who sends Shadow Lugia after you. But again, you just throw a Master Ball at it, and Greevil's like, no, I can't believe it. And then Greevil himself challenges you. And while that's a pretty tough fight, it's honestly not as tough as Aldez, in my opinion. Anyway, once you beat him, Greevil falls to the ground and he becomes a vulnerable, pathetic old man. It's at this point that Ardos returns. Ardos tells Greevil, hey, you know what? We haven't lost yet. Why don't you blow up the island with Michael on it and we can get away? And even Greevil's like, what the fuck? We're not gonna blow up our own people? That's nuts. Well, he doesn't say it like that. He says, but our people. And Ardos says, to hell with them. Let's just me and you get out of here. And that's when Aldez arrives and says, no, we're not going to do that. You've lost. Think about it. Michael's a young teenage boy who came here alone, tore through every last obstacle in front of him, to include 4 shadow Pokemon, legendary Pokemon in a row, and beat us. So we need to just give up and get out of here. Ardos and Eldez get into a bit of an argument, and then it's revealed that Ardos and Eldez are actually Greevil's 2 sons. Yes, the father-son motif. Remember, I talked about that earlier. Also, there's a whole Labrina sister thing, but I don't think that's related. Anyway, Eldez convinces Greevil not to commit mass murder, and the 2 of them escape, but not before Ardos leaves looking just angry. And we never see Ardos again. So after this, Eldez tells you that they will leave in peace, and that's it. Cypher's defeated, and the region is saved. So what does all this mean? Alright, so what it could imply is that Mr. Greevil is actually just a vulnerable, scared old man who was manipulated into all this. He's already the richest man in the world according to the lore of the game, and he has access to 4 legendary shadow Pokemon. He probably thought he was invulnerable, untouchable, couldn't be beaten, but then Michael showed him, hey, you can be beaten. Take that, bitch. That's when he reverts back into his passive old man self. It's almost like he's been manipulated this entire time by Ardos. We don't see Ardos at all through the rest of the game, the post-game that is. So it could be implying that Ardos was the secret villain all along. If there was going to be a 3rd game, something tells me that this storyline would have been wrapped up, as well as just tying up loose ends in both games, like why was Team Cypher revived, who was the real master of the game, and things such as. And by the way, if you don't think there's a father-son motif, story, through line in this game, I've got some waterfront property to sell you in Big Bend. Check out that video, by the way. It didn't do very good. Anyway, if y'all want to hear me kind of discuss maybe the father-son theory, I'm working on something, but I don't think there's much there, but I think there is something. I don't know if there's fire, just a little bit of smoke. Anyway, was Ardos the true villain? I don't know. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think, or let me know if you want to hear more of my thoughts. Let's move on. Rui is supernatural. Alright, so what do I mean by this? Well, as I've said earlier, canonically only 2 people can tell shadow Pokemon apart from regular Pokemon, because they give off a strange black aura. Rui and Michael, and once again, Michael's only able to using technology, but Rui's able to see shadow Pokemon naturally. Well, why is that? We don't get an answer. We don't know. I know that's unsatisfying, but I mean, it's never explained as to why she specifically can see shadow Pokemon when no one else can. It's almost as if she just has supernatural abilities. Now, that's not too far-fetched. We have seen trainers in Pokemon games that have psychic power, so why couldn't Rui just be one of those? But no one else in the game seems to be able to see them. I don't know. It's just interesting. Let's move on. Ore is post-apocalyptic. Alright, so I already vaguely mentioned this way earlier in the Iceberg, but a lot of fans have a theory that Ore is post-apocalyptic, meaning that there's an earth-shattering event that happened and Ore is the remnants of human society in the Pokemon world. Now, the evidence for this being is how underdeveloped the region is, the fact that wild Pokemon have been driven away from the area, and things such as. We already talked about how crime is just big in this area, and stealing Pokemon is no big deal. Well, some fans subscribe to the theory of the Great Pokemon War, which I already talked about way back in the beginning of the Iceberg, in which earlier games in the series, the region was kind of underdeveloped except for in certain cities. and there's talk of a war. Lieutenant Surge talks about being in a war, and apparently there's not a lot of young men, which is not true. And that's why kids are just allowed to train with these dangerous monsters, like a 3-foot tall bee with giant stingers for hands, and just run out into the world, etc., etc. So the world is post-apocalyptic, and Ore is a result of that. No, probably not. Again, Ore's not canon, but it could be what they were thinking. As far as I know, the head illustrator and Genius Sonority wanted to create a totally different world, and they wanted to juxtapose cute characters with kind of a bleak background. That was kind of their goal, right? But I don't know. Could Ore be post-apocalyptic? What are your thoughts? Let's move on. Michael's father was killed. So according to text in the Japanese game, it's implied that Michael's father's death may have been unnatural. Now, this could mean a lot of things, and it could frankly just be a bad translation. But if that were true, it could mean that Michael's father was actually assassinated, unalive, to put it simply. Now, what is the evidence for this? Well, not much, but we know that Michael's mother and father, as well as Professor Crane, were 3 researchers that led the charge against purifying shadow Pokemon. They arose out of the events of the first game, and the first game is 5 years before the events of the second game. And not too long before the events of the second game, Michael's father passes away. So it would make sense that Team Cypher wouldn't want them to do what they're doing and would actually unalive Michael's father, considering the fact that we already know that Ardos, at least, is willing to blow up an island with you and a bunch of his own people on it just to get away. So we know they're willing to shed blood. Furthermore, we know that they know where the Pokemon Research Lab is because in the beginning of the game, they come to the lab to abduct Professor Crane and force him to work for them, which doesn't work out. So we know they have a motive to stop him, Michael's father that is. We know that they know where he is, and we know that they're willing to shed blood for their cause. So, if true, it's possible that Cypher assassinated Michael's father, which, if it were true, would give Michael just an insane amount of motivation to do what he does. Because when you think about it, Wes is a young adult and he's fearless. We already seen how daredevil he is, but Michael's a young teenage boy with barely any experience in battling. At the beginning of the game, he's battling on a simulation, and we know he knows at least of Pokemon. He knows right and wrong somewhat. And we know he's brave and basically fearless. So it would make sense if Michael believed Cypher to have something to do with it, that he would do this. This all might have been tied into a third game that tied up loose ends, or even a manga, which there is no Pokemon XD Colosseum manga, but it'd make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Yeah, this one's a dark entry, but it is the last of the Iceberg. And with that, and that was the Pokemon Colosseum and XD Colosseum Gale of Darkness Iceberg. Thank you all so much for watching. I had so much fun with this one, and it gave me an excuse to replay the games instead of, working on something. Anyway, y'all, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and a comment, subscribe, all that mess. If you didn't like it, hey, no problem. Unsubscribe, dislike, whatever. But leave me a comment letting me know why. I want to know what I got wrong, what I could have done better on, and whatever else. Of course, super thanks, and memberships are available. Of course, don't ever feel like you have to give me anything. Don't worry about it, but I am poor. Anyway, with that, I hope you stick around the channel to enjoy some other videos, check out my old work and everything else. Again, thank y'all so much. Take care.